Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Jennifer Ignacio, and I'm assistant curator here at PAMM. This is very exciting because tonight is the first night of the Black Audio Film Collective at PAMM, which is a series of films we selected to screen in conjunction with the John Akamfra Tropicos exhibition, which we have on view on the second floor. If you haven't seen it yet, please do. It's right to the right as you leave the auditorium. The exhibition was curated by Diana Nowie, Associate Curator here at PAMM, and it presents this large-scale video installation which examines the first encounters of European explorers and the people of Africa in the 16th century. John Akamfra, along with 6 other members, artists and filmmakers, created the Black Audio Film Collective in 1982, and they worked together until 1998. While producing groundbreaking films that address both political and racial issues in Britain, they explored and examined Black identity in Britain. Their films not only offer new ways to examine the past, but also a new way to reflect on the present and the future of Black culture. But tonight we have Yesomi Umolu. But before I introduce her, I wanted to let you know that we have 3 other screenings. The next one will be July 13th, then July 27th, and August 10th. But you can find additional information on our website. So back to Yesomi. She's here tonight. She'll introduce Handsworth Songs, which was created in 1986 and directed by John Akamfra. Yesomi Umolu is exhibitions curator at the Riva and David Logan Center for the Arts at the University of Chicago, where she specializes in global contemporary art and spatial practices. She also holds a position of lecturer in the Humanities Division. Prior to joining the Logan, Umolu was assistant curator at the Ellie and Edith Broad Art Museum at the Michigan State University, where she curated material effects, contemporary art from West Africa and the diaspora in 2015, and also curated John Akamfra Imaginary Possessions in 2014, among other exhibitions. She was previously curatorial fellow for visual arts at the Walker Center and also held curatorial positions at the European Biennial of Contemporary Art, Manifesta 8, and the Serpentine Gallery in London. She has also contributed to programming at Neva and Tate Modern in London. Umolu is the 2016 recipient of the Andy Warhol Foundation Curatorial Fellowship, and she's a member of the Board of Trustees of the Graham Foundation Advanced Studies of Fine Arts in Chicago. She received a master's in architectural design from the University of Edinburgh and a master's in curating contemporary art from the Royal College of Art in London. Please join me in welcoming Umolu. Yes, sir.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for the fantastic introduction, Jennifer. It's really my great honor to join you for tonight's screening. This is my first time in Miami and my first time in PAMM, and I'm really happy to do so wearing a kind of hat of my Englishness and helping you to introduce you to this really fantastic seminal work we're about to see tonight. Before I kick off my remarks, I would just like to thank, again, Jennifer and Anita for their kind invitation and really for their seamless organization of what will no doubt be a stellar program of events over the next next month or so. So I really encourage you to come back and see more works by Black Audio Film Collective. So tonight I hope to give you an entry point into Handsworth Songs that stems from an understanding of the context of its making. Over decades, art historians have argued about the relationship between art, life, and politics, seeking to uphold the autonomy of artistic practice. In the work of Black Audio Film Collective, these 3 vectors converge in a flourish of self-determination and avant-garde experimentation. Their work demonstrates art's capacity to change our ways of viewing and understanding the world, and one might posit also suggests possibilities for change. To begin, I'm going to share a few remarks about where we are now and propose that the realities of life in Britain today are linked to, borrowing a term from cultural theorist Stuart Hall, the unfinished conversations depicted in Handsworth's songs. Those of you who are followers of the news will know that Britain is in a state of crisis, socially, politically, and culturally. Today, Britain is a place that is struggling to find its identity on a regional and global stage, and xenophobia has increasingly been expressed against newcomers and the perceived other, which today is a Muslim minority. And growing nationalist tendencies have led Britain to turn its back on Europe through the ill-fated Brexit referendum. Concurrently, the working class, youth populations, and liberals from all spectrums of society take to the streets to express their frustrations at the growing conservatism of British society. The British establishment remains ambivalent to these shifts, teetering on the edge of collapse under the fallacy of a strong and stable Britain. The most palpable sign of this new conservatism was delivered by the then Prime Minister David Cameron in 2011, when he claimed that the state of multiculturalism in the UK had failed, blaming it in part for the alleged new wave of radicalization in Britain's Muslim community. What Cameron seemed to be suggesting at the time was the desire to establish a new society of assimilation where difference would be tolerated up until a certain point, for fear that it would stand in opposition to prescribed notions of Britishness. In my view, what he was indeed suggesting was a top-down definition of national identity. Cameron has come and gone, as you would have witnessed on your TV screens, but this rhetoric still looms large and stands in stark contrast to the fervent multiculturalism of Britain in the late 1990s and 2000s, when government policy appeared to acknowledge the differences in its population, allowing them to flourish independently under the rubric of a multicultural Britain. While the struggles to define British identity today play out in the streets, on popular news channels, and on social media feeds, they eerily echo the environment in which Handsworth's Songs was created in 1986. With the election of a Conservative government in 1979, headed by Margaret Thatcher, throughout the 1980s, the UK experienced widespread social unrest and fervent discord between the left and the right in a manner not too dissimilar to today. To understand the social breakdown of Britain in the 1980s, and indeed the social breakdown that we're experiencing today, we need to go much further back and consider the shifts that have happened in the country since the fall of its empire in the mid-20th century. In short, since this time, Britain has lived in the shadows of the glories of its past. It has had to contend with the aftermath of its claim to power and sovereignty via the excess and violence of imperialism. And indeed, questions of empire and power motivated the formation of the Black Audio Film Collective in 1982. As a multicultural group of young Britons coming of age in the 70s and 80s, Black Audio sought to interrogate the role and voice of the diaspora within contemporary British society. One might suggest that they simply pose the question, what does it mean to be Black in Britain? A question that is as urgent now as it was then. It is important to note here that the context of minority identities in the UK, Black is a term that has come to include Britons of Afro-Caribbean descent, as well as other ethnic groups, including the country's large population of South Asians. This is to say that the term Black was leveraged by Black Audio less as a single racial category, but rather as a political term, one that denoted solidarity against oppression amongst non-white and underprivileged voices of the United Kingdom. Following this logic, Black came to describe the other faces of empire, those on the other side of the power dynamics of race and class. This included communities who called the mainland home for centuries, as well as newcomers from former colonies and immigrants from further afield who arrived later to claim Britishness as their own. In the 1980s, these communities were facing mass unemployment and discrimination at the level of a state of emergency. Black Audio's work addressing the struggles of British minority communities brought them to address memory, representation, and participation vis-à-vis British culture, politics, and aesthetics. In the first instance, the collective was interested in recognizing the contributions of minorities to British society, one that often goes under-recognized until today. The collective's desire to surface these voices was greatly influenced by their close relationship to Stuart Hall, whose scholarly work explored the ways that power expresses itself in institutions, politics, and popular culture. Hall was a great inspiration to numerous generations of artists and filmmakers on both sides of the Atlantic. As British filmmaker Isaac Julian recently remarked, and I quote, "Hall was most adept at facilitating a productive dialogue between the worlds of contemporary art and critical theory," end quote. And John Akomfora once described Hall as a rock star, a pop icon of his generation, who spoke from the margins of the left to the center about hybrid identities. Akomfora and his peers took up Hall's assertion that contemporary understandings of Britishness ultimately had to include the myriad experiences of its diverse peoples. By chronicling multicultural identities in Britain, Black Audio's work also revealed widespread anxieties around migration and the legacies of empire. A series of events, including the 1985 race riots in Handsworth, Birmingham, which were triggered by police violence, and subsequent social unrest in London, came to define Black Audio's radical interrogation of the experiences of Black and ethnic minority communities in the UK. Handsworth's song does so by charting a narrative of Black British life from the formation of empire to the arrival of Afro-Caribbean and South Asian populations en masse in post-war Britain into the struggles of the 1980s. The work attempts to take stock of the events of 1985, to consider them as part of a historical continuum and as a significant turning point in race relations in the UK. By reflecting on Britain's blindness towards its minority populations, most specifically responding to the British media's demonization and criminalization of Black rioters, the film demonstrates that the social discord that the country was witnessing was directly related to the fear of the other and systematic divestment in minority communities. Handsworth's songs juxtaposes official accounts of the riots, as seen from fragments of news footage and print media, with on-site interviews, archival documents, and a seething cut-up soundscape, which actually works really nicely with our DJ outside. The confluence of the sources that makes up Handsworth's songs and its multi-layered rendering marks a significant innovation by the Black Audio Film Collective. As you will witness tonight, the group moves beyond the instructive nature of the documentary and autobiographical film genres to experiment with nonlinear essayistic montage. And here is where the politics of their work comes to light. In Handsworth's songs, Black Audio examined the official methods and means by which we record and archive the passing of time, including newspapers, audio recordings, photographs, and films, and show that in these conventional representational tools, we are often locked into specific perspectives, readings, and interpretations. Having been privileged to talk to members of the collective about this work, it is apparent that it strives to reveal the biases of an official narrative and the various platforms of its distribution. The film then proceeds to displace the dominant voice and include a multitude of other voices. Black Audio's undoing of the official narrative comes from an understanding of the archive not as a static entity, but as a living document, one that can reveal truths that fall outside of the boundaries of official memory. Akomfora, who is credited as director of the film, has stressed the significance of archives to illuminating diasporic identities. As he has explained, and I quote, "The archival goes to the very heart of how those identities are constructed and how they circulate in any culture. Because diasporic identities, in the absence of monuments that attest to their existence, have repositories of what they mean in the very thing that's supposed to deny their existence," end quote. This approach is expressed practically by the use of materials drawn directly from official state archives and libraries, including collections at the BBC and the Archive Film Agency. Trawling through this material, Black audios cite recorded moments that reveal the blind spots present in linear retellings of history. They also, most importantly, account for the experiences of marginalized communities so as to render history plural. Consequently, the film you're about to see tonight works not only by undoing the official voice, but also by usurping ideas of a monolithic Black perspective. By overturning established conventions of cinematic representation, Hansworth's songs ultimately prompts us to think differently about how one makes an image and then delivers a narrative. Poetic and poignant, the film is a rallying call for an enlivened imagination of Blackness in Britain. Through its poetic assemblage of disparate audiovisual materials, the film asserts a subjectivity that speaks not only to the politics of its time, but also addresses, and I borrow a statement from Martin Luther King here, also addresses the fierce urgency of the now. Thank you very much. Hope you enjoy the film.
Must have been a scary experience. Yes. can see the whole place in shutters. You know?
It's the 11th day of September 1985, and the Home Secretary is standing in a Handsworth street with confused eyes. The masses saw him struggle for composure, and they heard him mutter to journalists, "These are senseless occasions, completely without reason." Somebody said behind him, "The higher the monkey climb, the more he will expose."
You can see the problem, right?
You can't really say it's a colour fight, you know. You can't put it down to it, right? But it's like a man say, most of the shops them will get burned, let's face it. It's Indian own most of them, you know, understand? And it's just unfortunately at them shop they burn and the Indian own them, so it's mostly Indian place burned down if you come to that. But one and two different kind of people, white man get looking at the process, black man get looking at the process, you know. Enough man feel it all over. You see? So you can't really put it down to colour fight. You understand? The man them a fight for a cause, man.
And it was no black people were burning neither. It was just sure. It's mixed, man. See, you want to know where it start from, really. He's a stupid police boy. Yeah? Where see a man park on a double yellow line and dry him out and push all him head in a passing bus wheel that the driver for just skank on him brakes. See? Finna crush her brains. Now the people them never like it. So it's just fight. So them hold another brother and sit down on him. And the people them never like it. So it's just fight. So them arrest them and the people them say release them. And them are going with foolishness, so blood start. You over? So as the man said before, now others hearing the news, rush from outside and all about and rush in time to look for some pickings. Yeah? You over? And you have some say, well, is black against Indian. As the brother showed you before, rubbish that too.
Yeah.
See?
Yeah.
It's just police and them stupidity.
Yeah, you know
what them keeping up on black people. And black people, you just feel that they have had enough. See? So everybody just join together for cramp and paralyze them stupid situation.
to her. Remember Bunny Enriquez and Greta Bork and Lady June Barker? Remember Countess Koblonska with her black velvet top, her skirt of figured net over satin? Remember the nights of Karuba cocktails and Karuba sour, their secret pregnancies, your wet nursing and me nappy washing? It's about time we had our own child, our own Master George Hammond Banner Bart. That night, I moved from an idea to a possibility. I was born in a moment of innocence.
Mr. Nishal, what's your assessment of what was the cause of the riots here?
Well, you're asking a million-dollar question.
Something does seem to have gone seriously wrong somewhere down the line, doesn't it?
Well, again, you're asking me very serious questions. I think, as I said, there was a day before. It was very nice atmosphere. I was there, watching people enjoying themselves. And suddenly something has come up. It must be some serious cause. Why it has happened, it's a completely mystery to the police, to everybody.
In 1984, 23rd of November, there is an article in Evening Mail, which I said on the last paragraph, looking to the future, Mr. Robani said, the authorities were storing up trouble which could exploit any time. Something must be done. This is a crime. Something must be done. Something has gone terribly wrong.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Jennifer Inacio. I'm an assistant curator here at PAMM. Thank you for joining us tonight for the second night of the Black Audio Film Collective film screenings. Well, for those of you who weren't here last week, I'll just give a quick background. We did build this film program around or to run in conjunction with the Jana Confra exhibition that we have here on the second floor. It's a large-scale video installation curated by Associate Curator Diana Nowie. And as an institution, we wanted to look deeper or look further into the work of Jana Confra, and we couldn't find a better way to do that other than to film a selection of screenings from the Black Audio Film Collective. Confra, along with 6 other filmmakers, British artists and filmmakers, formed the collective in 1982. And together they produced a series of video essays and documentaries until 1998. Tonight's film, as you'll see, was directed by Reese Auguste. I'm not a great speller. While addressing political and racial crisis in Britain, the group and their films offer us new ways to examine the past or look at the past and really reflect on the present and the future of today's Black culture. But, sorry, I got confused. Before I introduce our speaker, I wanted to ask you to join us outside in the galleries. Join the galleries. We're open tonight until 9. And I also wanted to let you know about our 2 upcoming screenings. The third one will be on July 27th. We'll be screening 7 songs from Malcolm X. And the last one will take place on August 10th. We'll be screening 2 films that night, The Last Angel of History and Memory Room 451. The 3 of them were directed by Jana Confra. So now I would like to introduce you to Jason Fitzroy Jeffers. We're really glad to have him here. Jeffers is a Miami-based writer and filmmaker from Barbados. As a journalist, he has covered lifestyle, arts, and local politics in South Florida for publications such as the Miami Herald and Ocean Drive. As a filmmaker, he has produced award-winning short film Papa Machete. The film world premiered at the 2014 Toronto International Film Festival and had its U.S. premiere at the 2015 Sundance Film Festival. It has since screened at more than 30 film festivals around the world, and most recently, he produced 2 short films selected for Sundance 2016, Swimming in Your Skin Again and Dolphin? Jason's also one of the founders of Third Horizon, a Miami-based collective of Caribbean filmmakers, musicians, and artists. The collective recently inaugurated the Third Horizon Caribbean Film Festival, which aims to celebrate and empower the new creative voices emerging from the region. Please join me in welcoming Jason Jeffers.
Hello, everybody. You good? Yeah, cool. So, let's start by going back a bit. On October 18th, 2015, 31-year-old African-American man named Corey Jones was driving southbound on I-95 and exited on PGA Boulevard in Boynton Beach. He was a drummer in a reggae band and was just returning from a gig just a little bit further north in Jupiter. He ran into some car trouble and pulled his car off the road. In the hours that followed, in attempting to get back on the road again, Jones would eventually call his brother for assistance and also one of his bandmates, who eventually came with some motor oil and tried to get the car started. That didn't work, so he then called AT&T Roadside Assistance, Florida Highway Patrol, and was eventually able to schedule a tow truck to come and look after him. At that point, his bandmate left him, certain that he would be okay. He would not be. Soon after, a plainclothes police officer pulled off the road not far from Jones's car to see what was going on. Before long, that officer emptied 6 bullets into his body, killing him. I remember that shooting well, and I'm sure some of you might, although if you don't, it's understandable. It occurred during a spate of highly publicized killings of black men at the hands of the police, one which frankly hasn't slowed and truthfully has been going on much longer than the press has cared to pay attention to. 400 years or so. Corey Jones didn't make national headlines the way that Mike Brown or Philando Castile did, but his death struck me particularly hard for a number of reasons. 1, I have worked as a professional musician in a reggae band. 2, I regularly drive I-95. 3, as you may have noticed, I am a black man. In the hours that followed this news, I processed the usual sadness and anger that follows one of these shootings, but this one being so close to home, I couldn't help but think about my mother in Barbados and how she might have reacted were it me. The distance between us would have only amplified the questions that arise when something like this happens, one the chief among them being, why did this happen? But see, here's the thing. Unfortunately, there's another question that often pops up that's even more basic than that one, and it's very, very simple. It's what happened? See, we're almost always robbed of a straightforward explanation when a person of color loses their life at the hands of the police. In the hours, days, and weeks that follows one of these shootings, we are almost routinely forced to endure a litany of farcical explanations on the part of the authorities and empty promises that truth will be uncovered. These questions usually linger unanswered well after funerals and remembrances, and the answers, if they ever do come, rarely bring any kind of resolution. In this particular instance, we have received some answers, as the officer in question was charged with manslaughter, an attempted first-degree murder with a firearm. It turns out that he had been lying about the initial circumstances under which it occurred. No surprise there. However, as we've seen in the recent verdict in the Philando Castile case, there's no assurance that the answers to come will bring any solace. What if this particular officer is found not guilty? It's likely. With such a verdict, a slew of new questions would be unleashed. The film we're about to watch, Mysteries of July, directed by Risa Ghost, confronts these questions head on. But here's the thing. The questions that it tasks itself with looking at don't take place here in America in the last 10 years, but rather in Britain in July 1989, during 4 separate incidents when young men of color lost their lives while in police custody under initially unexplained circumstances. While we know that state violence is nothing new, and certainly isn't limited to America, the similarities between what transpired then and what's transpiring now is still alarming. In considering the passage of time and the distance between the subjects of this film on one hand and Corey Jones on the other, that question, what happened, becomes significantly larger. If anything, it metastasizes. It comes to encompass not just a holding cell or the side of the road on I-95, but a span of history dating back. The question becomes, what is happening? Unlike many other films which delve into similar topics, Mysteries of July makes room for the emotional weight this question is burdened with, something that a lot of documentaries don't do. It accomplishes this by serving as part investigation and part ceremony. It does this by moving beyond the traditional talking heads, although there is certainly some of that, to present a series of funerary tableaus which, because they're captured on film, presents us with something of, you could say, like an endless ceremony, one that stands to live far longer than anybody who was involved in the making of this film, or for that matter, anybody who is in this room right now. It's a mournful protest that understands that no matter what evidence it uncovers, no matter what answers it provides, that it should attempt to make space for the communal grief that these incidents open us up to, a grief that has been unspooling for centuries now. Mysteries of July is a seminal work in the filmography of Black Audio Film Collective, as Jennifer mentioned, a group of filmmakers and multimedia artists with backgrounds in everything from psychology to fine arts, who came together in Britain in 1982 to create work that investigated diasporic African and Asian identity and post-colonialism in Britain during a tumultuous decade that saw its fair share of deep social unrest that was triggered by, I guess you could say, the ghosts of empire. As you might, as Jennifer just said, PAMM is showing the work of the collective every Thursday, and I would really implore you to come out and catch the rest if you can. It's stellar work, and I must say that it's been tremendous inspiration to me as a filmmaker, and with what we're attempting to do with Third Horizon, to give voice to Caribbean filmmakers and artists of all types, because their work investigated and gave voice to the culture from the inside out. In this case of this film, it gives voice to what's more, the investigative collective memory, the things that we try to deny, collective questioning, moved beyond the facts, and presented memory as this living archive from which to draw new understanding, and that really resonates with me. I want to say thanks to Jennifer, to Anita Brown, of course, Franklin Sermons, the entire staff here at PAMM for presenting the program, as I think it's of such great significance right now. We find ourselves confronted with threats of walls and bans and restrictions based on ethnic and national identity, and there's so much violence embodied in that. I may be naive, but I like to think of it as the kind of death gasp of a dying worldview that can't stand to see us loving each other up beyond the racial divides that have come between us for so long. No single film can answer the question, what is happening? The question that we are being asked to face up to when we watch this film. But it can wake us up to how accepted we have allowed these questions to become. It can wake us up to how mundane our sustained grief is, so much so that we often become numb to it. I would like to think that Mysteries of July asks us to participate in this ceremony, to move past an intellectual confrontation with facts to spiritual confrontation with our emotions and the emotions of those who came before us, and the sorrows that we may think we have moved past and attempt to smother when they arise. It's difficult, almost unbearable, but in allowing ourselves to truly feel these things, we remember that we are alive, and that collectively we can address the big question that results in the murders of these people over and over and over again. And in so doing and feeling this, we reclaim our power. To do anything otherwise would be to march on unmoved, as if we were dead ourselves. And as Frantz Fanon said in The Wretched of the Earth, zombies, believe me, are more terrifying than colonists. So, enjoy the film.
When confronted with a suspicious death in police custody, the bereaved will enter two mutually exclusive worlds: the world of inquests and judicial procedures, and the private world of grief and mourning. Separating these worlds are unanswered questions about the treatment of citizens incarcerated by agents of the state. And it is this treatment that today raises alarming and disturbing questions about police powers and accountability. According to Inquest, there have been over 700 deaths in police custody in the last 2 decades. In 1989, there were 37 such deaths in London, 4 in July alone. We saw the lives of Vincent Graham, Edwin Carr, Sullivan Bawani, and Jamie Stewart fade before our eyes.
My son James cruelly and tragically lost his young life on July 1st, 1989, in the custody of the police at Holloway Station. The sad and awful event of that day lives on with us as each day approaches. How can you get over such a painful thing? A young healthy man stopped by the police without no really just cause. But as they say, they're at liberty to stop who they want to. James was a youngster who loved life and loved living. A lively 22-year-old with always that broad smile across his face. He had so many plans and bright ideas, just feeling his feet and trying hard to make a go of life, but he was never given a chance. Suddenly, the one you love so dearly, a son, a brother, a father, a husband, uncle, friend, is gone.
Before and after inquests into suspicious deaths, the bereaved will enter the world of mourning and concede powerlessness in the face of grief. In mourning the dead, the force of grief always threatens to consume them. Paralyzed by loss and invaded by grief, some will find tranquility through a dialogue with God in the shrines of mourning. Here, mourners become keepers of the shrines. They tend them, restore the props of ceremony, memorize elegies, chant lamentations, recite psalms, and cultivate the act of remembrance, adding to the names of their lost ones the names of others.
Jamie Stewart was pronounced dead at Whittington Hospital in the early hours of 1st July 1989. An hour or so earlier, he had been driving down a road near Archway with 3 friends. In Jamie's case, what we are dealing with is a man who was arrested, brought to Holloway police station, and died within 40-odd minutes of his arrival at the police station. What is beyond dispute is the circumstances of his arrest in the first place. We are told by his arresting officers that he was stopped while he was driving in his car. He was stopped because he was thought to have been speeding. There were 3 other people in the car with Jamie at the time. A young man, then aged 15 or 16, called Adolf Modest, and 2 younger children. Adolf also describes a torch being shown in his eyes and Jamie being asked whether he's white or black, since his skin is quite fair. Jamie was asked to get out of the car, and he did so. The car was searched by the officers. Jamie was being asked again and again for his details, and Jamie gave those details. There is no dispute that Jamie was then searched whilst he was on the pavement outside the car. There is also no dispute that the search at that stage was thorough enough to discover a packet of Ritzlers from his person. Adolf describes the search to be much more thorough than the police officers do. He talks about Jamie's trousers having been lowered to his ankles. In the evidence of the arresting officers of Jamie, they said quite categorically that Jamie had been searched, and I recall one of the officers saying something to the effect of it was not a search he was proud of. In any event, Jamie was handcuffed after the search at some point, placed in the back of a police van. The young man, Adolf Modest, is asking for the keys for the car because he wants to return it to Jamie's family. Adolf asks again for the keys to the car, and at this point, the officer says to young Adolf, "I don't like your attitude." This is according to Adolf. And he's then arrested as well, handcuffed, placed in the back of the van. And Jamie, Adolf, and the 2 officers go to the police station, Holloway police station. We then come to the stage where something happened which led to a struggle. It appears that Jamie had been processed by this time, and then he was either about to be searched, if you believe the officers, or was in the process of being searched, if you believe the young lad who was in the charge room at the time. What the young lad saw, he said, was while the officers were searching Jamie, it seemed as if they had put a hand between his legs. Jamie gets up, walks, takes a few steps, and then the police officers say that just as he is reaching that interview room, they see him raise his hands up by his head, and that is the sort of motion that they described. By that stage, the police officers caught up with him. And then there was some struggle. Within seconds, Jamie had been brought back to the desk and was on the floor with at least 4 officers on him. Now, we heard evidence at the inquest from the officer who was around his shoulders. That officer described how he was holding out Jamie's arms on either side. And as he was doing that, he sees something come out of Jamie's mouth. He describes it as a piece of kebab. That's what he said he thought it was. He said he didn't pay any more attention to it at that stage. Jamie is then handcuffed and taken away into a police cell. The officer who had seen what he called a piece of kebab coming out of Jamie's mouth gave evidence that he went to Jamie's cell about 15 minutes after Jamie had been placed there and saw Jamie screaming, kicking, arching his back up. Jamie was still handcuffed, remember. Another 15, 20 minutes, maybe more, passes. And then we are told by the officers that the inspector who had arrived at the scene of the arrest earlier and had by now returned to the police station, together with the 2 sergeants who were on duty as custody officers on the night, went to the cell and found Jamie unconscious. What we were not told was what caused that inspector and the 2 sergeants to go to the cell. It's unusual, to say the least, for officers of that rank to go to a cell for no reason. The ambulance arrives a few minutes later. They take over the resuscitation, and Jamie is then taken away to Whittington Hospital. On arrival at the hospital, Jamie was seen by a casualty officer. That casualty officer gave evidence at the inquest. She had a note of a history given to her. That history was something in the terms of Jamie having a history of epilepsy, Jamie having knocked his head against a wall, and Jamie having then been found unconscious. She was unable to identify who had given that history to her. It came out in the inquest, and it was established beyond dispute that it was certainly not the family, since the family were not informed about what had happened.
Hello, good evening. Welcome. My name is Jennifer Nassau. I'm Assistant Curator here at PAMM. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for the 3rd screening of the Black Audio Film Collective here at the museum. As many of you may already know, the film program was built in conjunction with the John Confer exhibition that we have currently here on the 2nd floor. It's a large-scale video installation curated by our Associate Curator, Diana Nowie. Aconfra, along with 6 other artists and filmmakers, together built this collective in 1982 and produced a series of documentaries and video essays until 1998. By addressing political and racial crises in Britain in the 80s and 90s, the films now offer us ways to, 1, reflect on the past, 2, think about the present, and then, most importantly, plan for the future. This was not only perfect timing to bring the films by the collective to run in conjunction with Aconfra's exhibition, but also to address and contextualize racial tensions of our current time. Unfortunately, we can say that xenophobic feelings or fears of the other that happened in the 80s, when the collective was working together and addressing these topics, are unfortunately resurfacing not just there in Britain, but also here. So by bringing these films to our diverse audience, we created an opportunity for the museum to act as a platform, both for dialogue and also for the sharing of ideas and possibly solutions. Before I introduce our speaker, I wanted to let you know that we are not going to hold a Q&A, but that's only because we encourage this conversation to continue amongst ourselves, either introspectively or collectively as a group. I also wanted to invite you to join us for our last screening, which will be in 2 weeks from tonight, August 10th, also on the Thursday night at 7 p.m. So we'll be screening 2 films, The Last Angel of History and Memory Room 451. Both are also directed by John Aconfra. So now I'll actually be introducing our guest speaker, Alessandra Raenga. She'll be discussing a little bit on tonight's film, and Alessandra is an associate professor of moving images studies at Georgia State University. She writes on African American art, Black diaspora cinema, and visual culture, race and aesthetics, and she's the author of On the Sleeve of the Visual, Race as Face Value, and of Critical Race Theory and Bamboozled. Okay. Raenga is the founder and coordinator of Liquid Blackness, a research project on Blackness and aesthetics from the Department of Communication at Georgia State University. She's also the general editor of Liquid Blackness's journal. So please join me in welcoming Alessandra Raenga.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be here. I want to thank PAMM and this wonderful program for inviting me to hopefully give some words of introduction about the film. And I do want to let you know that while I'm going to say hopefully something, kind of some contextual elements, I also believe that viewing is a very personal experience. And so hopefully when I say will not guide too much your own personal experience. Black Audio Film Collective had been interested in Malcolm X for a long time. And in 1991, they approached the subject with a film about one of the most charismatic and elusive figures from the Black Power movement in Britain, Michael de Freitas, popularly known as Michael X. The film in question is Who Needs a Heart? And it's very hard to see. It was commissioned by Channel 4 for the series TV With a Difference. Film scholar Laura Marks is one of the few people who has written about it. Upon researching the documentation of Michael X's dubious activities, including the founding and running of the Black House, a cultural and artistic center of the Black Power movement in Britain, the Black Audio Film Collective encountered a stone wall of silence and evasion with regards to people involved with the self-proclaimed militant at the time. Unable to find conclusive evidence, John Aconfra claimed, "If uncovering the truth is impossible, then make an impossible film." So I'm going to show you a short clip. It's less than 2 minutes from the beginning of the film. The first part is very traditional. There is just a newsreel footage, a clip from newsreel footage. Is the only time in the entire film that we see Michael X. Then there is a middle part when you're going to see that the film is drained of sound. There is dialogue that you see. We see people's lips moving. We don't see what they say. And there is a third part when sound is used in yet another kind of creative way, and then I'm going to talk about it. That is, Black Audio's translated this absence at the narrative core of the film into a formal instability. The film showcases in vibrant colors the opposite of 7 Songs for Malcolm X, the fashion and style and gestures of the Black Power generation, but it is drained of sounds that are key to understanding what is going on, and particularly character motivations. We hear ambient sounds, minimalist instrumental music, but the dialogue is muted, so that we see people's lips moving, but we don't hear what they say. Or if we do, the sound is muffled and distant, as if it was coming from elsewhere. To find a trace of real events, writes Laura Marks, who needs a heart turns inward to gestures, colors, and music. Hence the sense of weightlessness and inversion that baffles so many Black audio fans. Arguably, in the case of Malcolm X, Black audio was facing the opposite problem of a too much, especially given the media frenzy surrounding the Spike Lee production occurring in the same years. And in part, 7 Songs for Malcolm X was also Black audio's preemptive response against Lee's interpretation of the political leader and the concern that he was going to turn Malcolm into a commodified Afrocentric icon. Lee is briefly interviewed in the film, a bit like an uncooperative sign or an elliptical specimen, as Aconfra described him, and the film features also footage of the premiere of Lee's Malcolm X. But more profoundly, 7 Song abides by a logic of scarcity and minimalism, more preoccupied with offering avenues of reflection than galvanizing answers, and attracted by the dystopic elements that linger even around such a now celebrated figure. The film assumes a tone of gravitas. It is weighted down, hunted by a sense of premonition and foreboding. It is in an interview with Cass Banning about the specific film that Aconfra famously described the necrophilic impulse at the heart of Black filmmaking, in the sense of a commitment to resurrecting figures from the past. Indeed, James van der Zee's Harlem Book of the Dead is one of the main sources of inspiration for the film. Van der Zee's funeral photography demonstrates a desire for opulence also in death, a desire that led Black audio to turn to cinematographer Arthur Jaffa, known for his radical work in Julie Dash's Daughters of the Dust, a groundbreaking film now rediscovered as a primary source of inspiration for Beyoncé's Lemonade. Incidentally, Jaffa had shot second unit in Spike Lee's own Malcolm X and went on to be the cinematographer in his next feature film, Crooklyn. At that point, Jaffa was known for his radical experiments with sensitometry, the sensitivity of film stock to light, and therefore its ability to faithfully render black skin on film, and with what he called black visual intonation, the manipulation of frame rates, and therefore speed of movement to seek a way for black people to move in film with the same beauty and alienation displayed in black music. That's how he describes it. To shoot Seven Song, Jaffa used the new swing and shift Claremont lens, which Akamfra nicknamed the Masai lens, because it afforded a certain amount of elongation in the subjects, which could appear strategically skewed. It could also selectively manipulate distinctions between foreground and background. So the film can also render passage of time within one single frame, static frame. So you see the selective use of focus within the frame. The film is divided in 7 sections as a way to reject the idea of an overarching theme and embrace instead an aesthetic of bricolage. It pivots around the symbolism of the number 7, which Malcolm's mother considered the number of vision, after W.B. Du Bois's description of the Negro as the 7th son born with a veil, a second sight. The fact that Malcolm was the 7th son in his family, and so was Gabriel Prosner, who was involved in his assassination. And the 7th mosque in New York is where Malcolm rose to prominence within the Nation of Islam. The goal was to find formal and dramatic principles not to let the figure of Malcolm X coalesce into a coherent melodramatic character, even though the individual tableaus do, sometimes in very unexpected ways. Indeed, one of the most striking features of Seven Songs for Malcolm X is its obvious theatricality. It is structured around tableau vivant, as a form that underscores the active staging of salient and carefully selected moments, and the perspective through which we know them, while also emphasizing the specific art historical frame through which we see. Van der Zee, again, is an important influence also in terms of African-American portraiture, such as carefully constructed tableaux containing symbols of social status. They abide by a politics of respectability, which we hear from Greg Tate's comment in the film. Malcolm X, instead, interprets in a very radical way. His, Tate says, was a, quote, anti-American form of black pride, unquote. Yet, in later portraits, such as this of Jean-Michel Basquiat, the tableau format begins to display elements of anachronism as well as a Gothic sensibility, which appears in the film as well. And I need to notice that a conference says they tried to use exactly the same chair in the film that Van der Zee used for Basquiat. Sometimes the film moves almost like a slideshow, blurring the line between still and moving image, and often props perform highly symbolic functions. Sorry, this was the Gothic. Sorry, and this is the jazz photography. And here's the props. Books hanging over young Malcolm's head stage his acculturation in the doctrines of Marcus Garvey in the context of his family. And we're going to see how the family dissipates, and eventually Malcolm dissipates from the frame as well. A bird cage eventually superimposed to Malcolm's face signifies the prison years. A series of sometimes silhouettes girls jumping rope seen at different angles and with different amount of energy and speed signifies first the changing demographic of the Nation of Islam as a consequence of Malcolm's leadership, and then the variable vibrancy of Malcolm's message as it becomes increasingly independent from the Nation of Islam. It might be challenging for the viewer to recognize what holds this film together. It might be even hard to identify which actor plays Malcolm X in the reenacted scenes. There are several excerpts from archival footage that brings us the voice, face, and charisma of Malcolm, but nobody that can make the drama clearly coalesce and cohere. This is a problem of dramatic form, but also of ideology and politics. In 1950, the first Hollywood film to focus on a black character was the Jackie Robinson story, and Robinson had to play himself to authenticate a severely sanitized version of his life. In 1977, Muhammad Ali stars as himself in The Greatest, a dramatized version of his life to compensate for his inability to fight in the ring as a consequence of his religious belief. Spike Lee's film relies on Denzel Washington's star persona to provide coherence. But this is not the choice of Black audio. On the contrary, quote, "If uncovering the truth is impossible, then make an impossible film," said Akomfra. And what he gives us is simply 7 songs for Malcolm X. Thank you.
FBI report, June 12, 1964. Anonymous caller at 140 says Malcolm X will be bumped off.
America's whole situation is a lunatic dream. Anytime you have a country that refers to itself as the free world and democracy, and at the same time has 22 million of its citizens who aren't permitted citizenship, why that in itself reflects lunacy. A collective lunacy on the part of Uncle Sam. And you almost have to be insane to deal with an insane man or an insane situation.
I met him just a week or so before he died at an airport. And he told me there that he had a telephone call with Martin Luther King. And they were going to meet and try to amalgamate their two forces, his Organization of Afro-American Unity and Martin's Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Sort of divide the country into the North and South, Martin in the South and Malcolm in the North. It would have been a great movement for these two charismatic men. And I think the government has to stop that at any cost.
The day that Malcolm was assassinated, February 21st, 1965, I had never seen him with the kind of expression that he had on his face and in his being.
I went to the Audubon with my son, Bill. He would worship Malcolm. When we went there, we couldn't help but feel there was something there. I wouldn't know how to pinpoint it, but there seemed to be a lot of anxiety.
Don't think that I don't know how bad I make myself look by attacking an organization that I was once so inseparably a part of. But I'm not particularly concerned with how bad it makes me look. My prime concern is to expose it to the fullest of my ability, let the chips fall where they lay.
Well, we all went to the meeting, and I had my children with me. We were sitting in the front, facing the sides of the Audubon, not facing the back looking front.
Benjamin got on the stage and he started to speak. And usually I take notes, and I still have the notes I took, and I'll read some excerpts. Anyone opening the door will face life or death. We must not care for personal consequences. Such a person is a good man.
When the last thing I said was, I now bring before you a man who would give his life for his people.
Just after he said that, there was a commotion in the middle of the room, and there was a distraction when 2 men seemed to jumped up, and one said, "Get your hands out of my pocket." And everybody, of course, had turned to look at these 2 men, and just then, shots were fired from the front.
I had 4 children. After we got bodies on the bench and covered them with my body. And it was my oldest daughter who said she could not breathe, And so that I had moved slightly so that she could get some air and breathe. And as I moved, kind of raised my head, I saw someone gasping like something horrible was happening. And I looked to the front to see my husband falling back.
And it was like all hell broke loose. A young brother passed me on the aisle, and so I told my son, stay here, and I followed him because I knew he must be going up to the stage.
Hello, good evening. Thank you so much for coming tonight. My name is Jennifer Ignacio. I'm assistant curator here at PAMM. As you may know, this film program we built around to run in conjunction with John the Confer exhibition that we currently have upstairs right now on the second floor. And just to give you a quick background, Confer formed the Black Audio Film Collective in 1982, along with 6 other filmmakers and artists he met in college. And they worked together as a collective until 1998 and produced a series of films that addressed racial and political issues in Britain at that time. Tonight, it's actually bittersweet because it's our last night, but I'm really excited to see these 2 films with you. The 2 films that we'll be screening tonight, The Last Angel of History and Memory Room 451. And it was really hard to narrow down these options, and I've been asking, I've been asked a lot of times of how we narrow down these options. So first, it was really important to show a selection of films from different years or different stages of the collective. So for those of you who have been coming here since the beginning of the series that we started in July 6th, you'll see the difference or a transformation within their work from the earlier works, and we tried to show that in chronological order. You'll see a transformation within a serious or a heavy tone from the earlier films that we screened, but also you'll see it changing a little bit to a more artistic and experimental approach, such as the film we'll see here tonight. But the second reason, or another important reason to choose these films, is because together, I think these 5 films as a group really show and present us ways to think about or reflect on the past and the present, but also plan for the future based on experiences that we have had, with racial and social tensions. But so that's it. I hope you were able to see all of them. If not, tonight's screening is really interesting as well, so you're in for a treat. But before I introduce our speaker, I want to let you know that we're not holding a Q&A section, and we only chose that because we want this dialogue to move beyond the screen and definitely beyond the stage and, organically flow amongst yourselves. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Erin Cristovalli. She is the assistant curator at the Hammer Museum in LA. Together with Amir George, she curates the Black Radical Imagination, which has screened both nationally and internationally. She has curated exhibitions in various institutions, including the Museum of Contemporary African Diaspora and Arts, One National Gay and Lesbian Archives, and the Los Angeles Municipal Art Gallery. She's currently organizing 3 exhibitions, and they're the 28th anniversary of Alternate Endings, Radical Beginnings, A Day Without Art, and Made in LA 2018, all at the Hammer Museum. So please welcome me and please join me in welcoming Erin. Thank you. Where is she? Hey.
Hey everyone, how's everyone doing? Good. Thank you for joining us tonight at the Pérez. I literally just got off a plane, so sorry if I'm a little loopy. But it was really interesting when I got this email to introduce these 2 films, Memory 451 and The Last Angel of History, because several years ago, I met Kodo Oshun, who you'll see in Last Angel of History in LA. He's part of a group called the Odalith Group. And it was just like a chance dinner where I sat down next to him and I was like his biggest fan. Because, you know, he's like Mr. Afrofuturism. And so I was talking to him and, you know, I didn't really say much about myself. I was a little shy. And then, you know, finally towards the end of the dinner, he was like, so what do you do? What are you interested in? And I just graduated from film school. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew I was interested in experimental film. And so I told him, I was like, well, you know, me and my friends have a little art collective and, you know, we talk about Afrofuturism. And he's like, oh, really? And I was like, yeah. And I was like, I'll send you some stuff that we do. And he's like, sure, here's my email. And I was like, what? Okay. So I emailed him and he was like, Aaron, this is great. He's like, you and your friend should do everything. You guys should do it all. You guys should go for it. And so that was like an email that really helped me actually consider curating, and what got me into a project that I do with Amir George called Black Radical Imagination, which is a touring program of short films that we screen basically all around, and we've been doing it for 5 years now. So he also gave me the password to his Lux account, and Lux is like this really amazing digital film bank. And so that was the first time I actually got to see the work of like the Black Audio Film Collective and his work and Jana Confra's work. So he has always been a big inspiration to me, and so has Jana Confra. So I'm honored to present these two films to you guys tonight. Thank you.
We came across the story of a blues man from the 1930s, a guy called Robert Johnson. Now, the story goes that Robert Johnson sold his soul to the devil at a crossroads in the Deep South. He sold his soul, and in return, he was given the secret of a black technology, a black secret technology that we know to be now as the blues. The blues begat jazz, the blues begat soul, the blues begat hip-hop, the blues begat R&B. Now, flash forward 200 years into the future. Next figure, another hoodlum, another bad boy scavenger poet figure. He's called a data thief. 200 years into the future, the data thief has told a story. If you can find the crossroads, a crossroads, this crossroads, if you can make an archaeological dig into this crossroads, you'll find fragments, techno-fossils, and if you can put those elements, those fragments together, you'll find a code. Crack that code, and you'll have the keys to your future. You've got one clue, and it's a phrase: mothership connection.
The Mothership Connection, it's kind of George Clinton's obvious, it's his 1974 album in which you have an alien, you have George Clinton who's like an alien in kind of silver foil, and he's kind of getting out of the spaceship. But you can't work out whether he's getting out of the spaceship or getting back into the spaceship.
By this time, black itself had become commercial. You know, it was hip to be black, you know, into the music, you know, the dance bands of James Brown and all of that. So, and hip-hop, rock and roll had just like faded out, you know, in '69. So it was time to make a change.
This figure is a thief. He's a data thief. And he's surfing across the internet of black culture, breaking into the vaults, breaking into the rooms, and stealing fragments. Fragments from cyber culture, techno culture, narrative culture. The data thief has two gadgets that he's going to use to navigate his way through our present. A black box and a rather special pair of sunglasses.
G. Clinton, George Clinton, Parliament Funkadelic, Funk, Uncut Funk, the bomb. George Clinton, I think, is a fucking maniac.
I was always fond of Star Trek. You know, I'm a Star Trek freak, or sci-fi freak. So the next record, I had to find another place that you hadn't perceived black people to be. And that was on a spaceship. So I pictured them in there leaning, like it was a Cadillac, sliding through space, chilling, having come here from the planet Sirius.
I went to see a concert when I was a little kid at this place called the Olympia Ballroom here in Detroit. I'll never forget it. I mean, that was like, for me, that was my first concert I've ever been to in my life. And I remember it because I'll never forget this man coming out of the top of the roof on a cable, dressed in a diaper and big white platform boots, playing a guitar, and called himself Star Child. And then this other dude walks out of a so-called spaceship that lands out of the middle of the stage. And these guys are playing this music. When I think about it right now, I'm there.
The Mothership Connection is Clinton's symbol for what happens to funk when you pass it through the studio and when it becomes kind of astro, or becomes space, or becomes extraterrestrial. The Mothership Connection is like the link between Africa as a lost continent in the past and between Africa as an alien future.
Roaming the internet, the data thief discovers a new word, Africa. Somewhere in this street is the secret of the mothership. The data thief knows that the first touch with science fiction came when Africans began playing drums to cover distance. Water carried the sound of the drums, and sound covered the distance between the old and the new world.
I first saw them in a dream. I was fishing on a lake, daydreaming. I saw faces in the water. When I woke up, I saw a white van, and one of them watching me. Where they listen to dreams.
I always wanted hair like the 3 degrees. I'd get a long towel, wrap it round my head, and flick it over my shoulders.
I prayed and I prayed and prayed she wouldn't appear like mine. For 9 months, I prayed and I prayed and I prayed. But then it was too late. She was born.
They were dream raiders. messengers from the year 3000. They move through time by turning into water, real water, as well as the water we see in our dreams. There was a burst of light, and then I heard myself. Every night, before they turn out the lights, I read a chapter. And all the days of the vow of his separation, there shall no razor come upon his head, until the days be fulfilled in that which he separated himself unto the Lord. He shall be holy, and shall let the hairs of the locks of his head grow. That's why I grow my locks. They were casual workers, employed by a corporation who had invented an ultra-wave time convector. They drew the short straw and ended up in